welcome to the selection committee. You may be expecting Dan Rubenstein. He's out busy eating important New York foods because sports are overrated. But he's left me in his place to talk a very premature college football playoff with me today. We've got Bill Connolly, Bud Elliott, and Spencer Hall. How are you guys doing today? Spencer, let's start with you. How are you doing since you have been traveling quite a bit?
There's no good way to do a West Coast road trip during the college football season. You should just know this. There's no good way to do it whatsoever.
But you did it anyway.
I did it anyway. You start before everyone really wakes up. It ends when everyone has gone to bed, and you fly back while everyone is sleeping. And somewhere in between, you have to eat. So there's really no good way to do it other than this. You do get to go to Autzen Stadium, which is like the tiny little noisy cricket of stadiums. It's this big, and it's insanely loud.
Good.
Totally lived up to the billing.
We're going to take advantage of your sleep deprivation, and we're going to have you start. After week 2, who do you have as your, based on just how they've played so far this year, your top 4 teams that would be in the playoff?
My top 4 teams, I always list 5 right after everything ends so that we can have one team on the bubble. But the 4 teams I would have in based just purely on quality of what I know they have and how they've played thus far. I'd start with Memphis. No, I wouldn't start with Memphis. But they almost beat UCLA, so that's something we have to talk about later. My 4 teams would be Oregon, based on what I saw, because they counterpunched. And it's rare to see a team that's capable of doing that this early.
That was definitely not a thing they had done under Mark Helfrich before this.
Well, you go back and I think maybe we've exaggerated their alleged decline or at least inconsistencies. 2-2 down the stretch is what really disturbed everybody last year in the Pac-12 schedule. But watching them, the adjustments they made were very different. We were used to Chip Kelly coming out and blowing people off the map in the third quarter. The defense turned the tide in that game, and I hope people remember that when they look at it. The defensive line, whatever adjustments they made, I would have to go back and look, were so effective that they blunted everything Michigan State wanted to do. And as Ohio State fans who have watched Jim Bowman coach before would probably hear with zero surprise, Michigan State didn't adjust after that. They had no answers whatsoever, and instead sort of went pass wacky with Connor Cook. So watching them was really impressive. I'd have Oregon. I'd probably have Alabama, which is admittedly a cowardly bet because you're simply betting on the degree and depth of talent there. I would probably have Florida State, see previous comments about Alabama. And then in that 4 spot, I'd probably have Oklahoma. But that's, again, strictly based on potential and talent. We've seen so little thus far. Oregon, for me, in terms of performance, and because I saw them, I'd have to put them first.
Okay, Bud Elliott, you're next. Who's in your top 4 this early in the season?
Based solely on what we've seen so far and not what we know these guys recruit normally, because I think if they really are that good, we'll see it down the line in the next week or the week after. But Oregon, for all the reasons Spencer said, Georgia, because I think they had one of the most dominant wins over Clemson of the season, a team that, again, there's some preconceived notions involved in this, so we have to kind of assume how good Clemson is or is not. Oklahoma, because they've played 2 teams that are not very good, but they have crushed both of them. And then A&M, a team that is very young but gelled quickly, went on the road and destroyed South Carolina, a team, again, we kind of have to think South Carolina's not just an average team. They might be decent or pretty good. So those are my 4 early on in the year.
Okay, so, Bud, who do you have just outside of that top 4 then?
I think it's got to be Bama and FSU, 2 teams that are lurking there. And, okay, you really haven't had the shot to prove it. You played teams that we think will probably make a bowl in week 1 or perhaps might be a little bit better than that in West Virginia and Oregon State. And you won less than comfortably, I think, relative to what the spreads were in both those games. And then you both played a really horrible team in week 2, and your starters went out there and dominated in both of those games. But they really haven't played a good opponent yet, or a really good opponent. And so that's coming in 2 weeks for FSU, and then in 2 weeks again for Bama, depending on what you think of Florida.
We're not going to get into that right now. But let's be honest, that Citadel win is going to look pretty sweet at the end of the year, right?
It really could. I mean, they Citadel a little bit better than I thought they were. They completed more passes against Florida State than they did against Coastal Carolina. And pretty crazy stat here, they've fumbled 10 times this year and have recovered all 10. That might be like some kind of record for the longest streak of not losing a fumble.
Bill Connolly, let's go to you. Who are your top 4 teams sitting after week 2?
Well, I guess last week I had Georgia and A&M, and neither of them, Georgia didn't play, but neither of them really gave me any reason to take them off the list. I had USC, and as badly as I want to take them off the list, despite the fact that they just won at Stanford, I guess I'll keep them on there. They did just win at Stanford. And I think the 4th team I had was Michigan State, which I will replace with Oregon. So in order, I would say Oregon first, and then I don't really care after that. We'll say A&M, then Georgia, then USC.
Okay. And if there's a 5th team that's just below them, who's that?
Well, Oklahoma has very much done everything it needed to do in these first 2 games. And like we're saying with everybody else, they'll have more than enough opportunity to prove themselves in the coming weeks.
And Louisiana Tech turned out is maybe improved this year under Skip Holtz. They got a nice win over Louisiana Lafayette that I don't think we saw coming.
Well, yeah, no. I mean, I think I saw that Louisiana Lafayette was inviting Louisiana Tech's commits to the game to say, here's a real Louisiana team, and they got smoked by Louisiana Tech. So, power to the Bulldogs for that one.
That's awkward. That's like going to somebody else's house, planning to go home with their wife, and just getting rejected.
In front of everybody, yeah.
Yeah, not that Skip Holtz would ever stop you from doing that.
Skip Holtz ruins everything.
Spencer, who do you have lurking just outside of the top 4 that you think can claw their way into it?
Georgia's right there, and I know that Bill will look at everything in terms of F+ or F-, but that he also believes in a little bit of the supernatural. And for me, there's nothing more supernatural than Georgia's continued struggles and/or foibles against South Carolina, because years and years and years in a row, you've watched these 2 teams play essentially their preseason games and then roll into this game and play against type, totally against character, make mistakes that they don't normally make. It's been a totally unpredictable game from both sides. South Carolina's been deplorable on offense, and it would not shock me if they held Georgia to under 350 yards in this game, because as shocking as that result would be, it's in line with how this usually plays out. There's been no predictive ability by anyone going into these games to say, oh, this is how it's going to go. The way this should go is Georgia should trample them. And the way it's going to go is going to completely...
They'll throw 50 passes and only run the ball 8 times or something.
The series is so screwed up that if Georgia does what I think they're going to do and what they should do, I'll still be surprised.
Good. So there's reason to watch just for the chaos then.
Yeah, I'd put Georgia right outside there. I'd put Baylor right outside there, mostly because I like them, but also because I think their defense is vastly improved, even against somebody as pitiful as SMU this year. And then in the Pac-12, I might take a flyer on USC, but they've had 2 vastly different performances,
right.
So that'll have to even out as over time before you can really get any sort of steady beat on them.
Okay, so where, if anywhere, is Virginia Tech in this conversation? Because, maybe it's just a product of Ohio State being too highly ranked and us just assuming that Ohio State would be able to bounce back better on offense from the Braxton Miller injury than they have. But are we ready to look at them and say they are slowly creeping into the picture, we think they're going to make some noise, or is it just not enough at this point?
I don't think being Ohio State without Braxton Miller means as much as it would have with. That's not a bold statement. So, no, I don't think Virginia Tech's there yet.
Bud, how about you? Does Virginia Tech make things more interesting for you in terms of who the ACC representative might be?
I mean, I guess a little bit, but I kind of put them there with Baylor, who I was high on last week, but then I saw just how bad SMU truly is and them getting crushed but in their game last week by some no-name teams. So they're interesting. They're maybe more competent on offense than I think we thought they would be. The defense still looks good, but, man, Ohio State's offensive line struggled against Navy. So that's 2 weeks in a row that they have just gotten crushed up front, and if they can't run effectively, that passing game is not great drop back. They're very play action based. So I don't know that I really am all that impressed by Virginia Tech as a national seed type thing. I am impressed by them relative to preseason expectations a lot of folks had.
Bill Connolly, I'm going to put it upon you to convince me and the rest of the world that BYU can come out of nowhere and sneak into this playoff. Maybe that's not fair, but I've asked it of you all the same.
Do you want me to convince you that they will make the playoff or that they should make the playoff?
I'll take either one.
because they're not going to make. I mean, they would have to go. They would have to go 12-0 and win every game by 40 points to get taken seriously at this point. But I mean, last year we know their defense is going to be very good because it's just very good. Bronco Mendenhall is a good defensive coach, but their offense seems to actually be competent. Last year they were moving very quickly and not actually going anywhere, and this year, they have to do it against somebody other than Texas. But if the offense comes around and they have a top 20 offense, why wouldn't they be a top 5, top 10 team overall? So that would be my case. But it's going to be really, really hard for them to not be in a major conference, not be in a conference period, and actually figure out a way to make a case to the committee.
I mean, the case would be dependent on all of their out-of-conference opponents being much better than we all think they're going to be right now. Virginia and Cal and Texas both have to end up being like, I don't know, 8-9 win teams, and no points UVA.
If you get to that point where Texas wins the Big 12 or something, they catch fire, they figure everything out, they run the table. Virginia turns out to be one of the better defensive teams in the country, and they go 8-4, 9-3. Who else have you got? But after that, you've got Boise State, who looked good last week. I think Colorado State's decent. You got UCF. And that's really, Middle Tennessee, UNLV, Savannah State, that's not going to cut it. So they better beat Virginia by like 100 because after that you're not going to see them for a little while. I guess UCF.
Entirely possible.
They're definitely going to beat Savannah State by 100. Savannah State's just begging you to beat them by 100, but it's going to take a lot.
If we're talking about the ACC, by the way, take a flyer on a team where if we're not talking about on the bubble, we can definitely talk about a team that's going to influence and or potentially ruin someone's seasons. Like in the SEC, that's Auburn. Auburn has a real possibility to screw up so many lives, right? And not win anything, but just
that's true outside of football as well.
It is. They are the Skip Holtz of teams. They ruin everything. But another team that has a possibility for deep ruination, Pitt.
Heck yeah.
They got to stay healthy. Their depth is really poor, but their starters look really good. They just lost their center to an ACL tear Friday night.
Yep, but they run the ball so nastily and can control the clock, and that's a hard matchup if they do exactly what they want to do on offense.
Okay, so now I want to ask you guys a incredibly unfair question this early in the season. I want you each to give me a team that already has suffered a loss that you are willing to say, if you had to pick one one-loss team, they would make the playoff. Bud, let's start with you.
I think with this question, we have to assume that 2-loss teams have no shot to get in. So you kind of have to look at what team has the best chance of not suffering another loss. And to me, that's Michigan State. Ohio State has to come to East Lansing. They really don't have other really quality opponents on that schedule. The Big Ten does appear to be pretty down this year. I think Michigan State, just because they have the best chance of finishing out the season undefeated, is probably the pick there.
Spencer, how about you? Who's your one-loss team you're willing to back this early?
One-loss team I am willing to back this early. Not Wisconsin. Like deeply and seriously not Wisconsin. If that is a real answer, I think another one-loss team that you can look at with some degree of confidence and say, I think they'll improve. I think Stanford. Stanford was so bad against USC that I don't see them staying put and just assuming the status quo offensively. They almost won that game. I think they could win every game 17-14. They
were weird bad in that game, too. It wasn't just like, oh, Stanford's got this obvious weakness that USC keeps exploiting. It was like, well, they keep putting the puzzle together almost and then vomiting all over.
Right. Like, they could have been improved. Stanford's a team that could be improved by taking one or two ideas out of the playbook. Like, that's not a bad thing to have when you're like, okay, well, we just won't do that.
Right.
So I think I would stand by a one-loss Stanford because they are the kind of team that can win every game 17-14. They're not too many tweaks away. Unfortunately for them, they're also not too many tweaks away from losing, as you saw this past weekend.
And the obvious advantage that Stanford has here is that they are the one-loss team that, in theory, would get to rematch the team that beat them. And I have a hard time seeing if Stanford runs the table, beats USC in the Pac-12 championship game, it kind of feels like that would be enough for this committee to put them in. Bill Connolly, who's your one-loss team that you're willing to be unfairly tagged with in September?
Well, I mean, the two obvious ones have now been taken, I guess. But a team like South Carolina or Clemson, if they run the table, would absolutely be involved. But they're not going to run the table, especially Clemson, obviously. I will say about Wisconsin. Do we know that McAvoy is better? Like, I know that Joel Stave is not very good. But is he really worse than McAvoy? McAvoy had a pretty good game this last weekend, but I've been really confused by that quarterback situation. If they get competent quarterbacking against good teams, they could win a lot of games.
Well, Wisconsin's done a good job of letting us see them struggle and then come up with some very disturbing reason why things have gone wrong. So the next thing you know, they could say, oh, yeah, Joel Stave's entire organ system is shutting down. We just didn't want to tell him.
Yeah, Wisconsin's answers are more disturbing than the problems.
Right. One team we haven't really talked about very much that looked very good, I think, this weekend and the weekend before is Notre Dame. So I don't know that they necessarily have done enough for us to put them in the conversation, but do we feel like they are going to be there at the end of the year? Or is this inevitably, probably when they play Florida State, going to all fall apart?
They can't run. Like they really can't run, and that's going to be a little bit of an issue because I think their passing game could be a lot more successful than we thought. Obviously, it was last week, but they just have no chance of running the ball against a good run defense.
But are you more worried about Notre Dame than you were entering the season, or are your feelings about them pretty much the same?
Preseason I thought they were going to be actually a really overlooked team by a lot of people, but then they lost, three really good key players for them, and those losses didn't show up so much against Notre Dame, or against Michigan rather, but I think over the course of the season, it's really hard to see them going or winning, 10 or more games. I think they're probably a 9-3 type team, maybe 10-2, but to see them going 11-1 or undefeated is really difficult because they do play so many quality opponents.
Spencer, do you have anything positive to say about Notre Dame at this point? It's okay if the answer is no.
Not at the moment, but I would like to get specific about that and say that face it, going to Arizona State, going to North Carolina, going to Florida State, going to USC, and getting Louisville. I think if Louisville is in the kind of shape that I think they'll be in on November 22nd, then that could be one of those ugly late-season blindside hits that comes out of nowhere because Louisville has the potential to do very, very cruel things to you and will continue to do them late in games. For instance, Bobby Petrino going for it on 4th and short with like a 40-point lead this past weekend.
So that strength of schedule also suggests that at the end of the season, Michigan fans could say, hey, we got shut out by an 8-4 Notre Dame team.
Yes, you're welcome for Cody Riggs, Notre Dame. You're welcome.
Last question for the panel. This upcoming week does not feature a lot of marquee games. The only game between ranked teams is South Carolina and Georgia. So, taking that one off the table, if you had to pick one game that you think is going to be the most meaningful in terms of where the playoff shakes out by the end of the year, which one are you going with? Bill, so that you are not unfairly saddled with the third pick, I will let you answer this first.
I'm looking at the games here.
Oh, Bill, I gave you the first pick and you weren't even ready. You're going to run the clock out?
Okay, well, how about nothing. There's nothing here. There's really nothing here. We'll learn more about Oklahoma. That's something. That's the best I can do.
Yeah, and at least Oklahoma will get a chance because the relative lack of interest in games is going on. They will get a chance to show off at a time when you would hope more people will be watching them than have been the last few weeks.
Right, yeah. Tennessee is probably just athletic enough to make you work pretty hard and too young to actually damage Oklahoma for 4 quarters. So they should have a chance to showcase themselves for 4 quarters, but this is a tough week.
Tennessee is the scrappy third grader that you're finding in a parking lot. Bud, what game are you going to pick for the most influential other than Gamecocks Bulldogs?
I think this line is crazy that UCLA is only favored by a touchdown against Texas and Dallas, given how bad Texas looked last week. Not that UCLA looked great, but a lot of people had UCLA in their playoff pick preseason, a lot. It kind of surprised me, and they've not looked very good in the first 2 weeks. If Texas jumps up there and next to UCLA, then I think that does do something to the Pac-12 strength of schedule argument. especially because Washington State has looked terrible. Cal did beat Northwestern. That's a positive for the league, but I think that does bear watching. But this week's slate of games is not very good, other than South Carolina, Georgia.
Spencer, you're stuck with the last pick here. Which game should we be paying attention to in terms of long-term playoff implications?
In terms of long-term playoff implications,
Florida, Kentucky, I think, is an obvious.
Most of the good ones have been taken. So I have to eat at the margins. And there's nothing more marginal, by the way, than Penn State at Rutgers.
Ooh.
Yeah. However,
but now national championship eligible Penn State. So congratulations, guys.
And bowl eligible Penn State. And Penn State, who, when we're looking at how bad the Big Ten might be, Penn State might be the standard bearer when we're looking at this. And it's going up against a Rutgers team that can score. That's really there. That's there. You gave me chicken. You gave me chicken shit, and I just made you chicken salad.
And you retreated to Ralph Regan, the last refuge of patriots, I think is the term, right?
If anyone can appreciate a scrounged up meal,
it's Ralph Regan. All right. Well, that has been the selection committee. We thank everybody for listening. Spencer, Bud, Bill, thank you all for your wisdom. Good luck to everyone's teams this week, except Michigan, because you should just give up and go home. We will talk to you next week, and thanks for tuning in.